This is A Word, a podcast from Slate. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. Though many of us try, few folks out there have real insight on everything from Middle East conflict to electoral politics to artificial intelligence and even the Kendrick Lamar-Drake beef. But award-winning writer Ta-Nehisi Coates is that guy, and he recently shared some of his insights with me.
The idea that what you really need to do is just kind of lower your voice while little children are having to have surgery performed without anesthesia. It's absurd and it's shameful.
Ta-Nehisi Coates from the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival, coming up on A Word with me, Jason Johnson. Stay with us.
Sign up to The Economist for in-depth curated expert analysis of world events and topics ranging from business and culture to science and technology. You'll get the weekly digital edition, online-only articles, curated newsletters on politics, the markets, science, culture, and China, and full access to The Economist Podcast Plus. The Economist is independent journalism for independent thinking. Go to economist.com and get your first month free.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Welcome to A Word, a podcast about race and politics and everything else. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. America is staring down the prospect of another long, hot summer of protest, where racial and generational divides sometimes feed the worst instincts amongst our leaders and our citizens. This year, the flashpoint is the Middle East and campus protests, which are forcing voters and the media to reevaluate how civil disobedience is discussed. We also have recent writers' strikes, labor strikes, and ongoing debates about race, culture, identity, and music, all in the backdrop of an election year between two highly unpopular candidates. Ta-Nehisi Coates is uniquely positioned to talk about all of these things in this moment. His books include Between the World and Me, We Were 8 Years in Power, and The Beautiful Struggle. He has earned a National Book Award and a MacArthur Genius Grant, and he's arguably the leading voice on the impact of race and identity on contemporary politics in the United States. He and I spoke in front of a live audience at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival in Seattle on May 4th. Our conversation ranged from artificial intelligence, electoral politics, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But we started out in pop culture, and I asked him what he thought the ongoing feud between Kendrick Lamar and Drake said about the state of hip-hop, or whether there was just two guys who didn't like each other.
I don't really know.
That's fair. That's fair.
I don't really know. I'll just put my cards on the table. I mean, Kendrick is probably my favorite hip hop artist of all time. I adore Kendrick. This is probably not what I come to Kendrick for, though.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know what's between him and Drake, but this is, I'm gonna turn 49 years old this year. And what that means is I've been seeing this, like, as long as I've been in the hip hop, and there are people who think that you have to have it in order to have hip hop, and I don't quite understand that.
Right.
When I go to write, I don't need to think about some other writer who I'm going to destroy. Even though writing is very competitive, it is. And so I don't quite. I don't quite get it. I guess that's what I'm saying, and I mean that literally. I don't mean I don't quite get it, like I'm making a judgment here or there. But this is, I guess, this is not what I come to Kendrick for. But it's not really what I ever came to hip hop for. And I love hip hop, but This was not the part that I came to it for.
Yeah, and it's interesting,
Like I can't listen to Hit 'Em Up. I listened to it one time. I don't play Hit 'Em Up.
Here's the thing: it's not just a kind of a vulgar song. I mean, like at the time when we were kids, it might have been entertaining, but you do sort of reach this point where you're like, I'm either listening to this music to escape or listening to this music to relax. And when it becomes overly personal, right, you kind of get to this point where it's like, y'all need to just text this out or maybe have coffee somewhere. I don't know why this has to happen on wax for everybody to listen to.
Yeah. I mean, also though, like I said, I'm I'm gonna be 49 this year, so they're not talking to me.
Right.
That's the other thing. So like, it's not like I firmly believe, as much as I love Kendrick, that hip hop is the music of the youth. So I had my time.
Right.
And now I have other things, and so I hope they can continue to make great music and great art. But this is not what I come to hip hop for. It's not what I come to art for. It's not really for me. That's probably what I should say. It's not for me.
Now, it's interesting you talk about, hip hop being for the youth, right? Today is May the 4th. Now, for some of you, that may mean nothing. Shame on you. For a lot of us, it's May the 4th be with you. It's Star Wars Celebration Day. It's also Free Comic Book Day. Oh. And you are a comic writer, which is something that sometimes people consider for the young people. I don't. I'm a comic reader. I've interviewed you about Black Panther and other comics you've written. I'm curious about this idea. I never agreed with it. But as somebody who produces the content, works in movies and everything else like that, there's been this sort of discussion in media over the last year that there is a fatigue about superhero films, that this sort of genre, that this sort of a part of our popular culture has maybe run its course, like Westerns or gangster movies or something else like that. As someone who is steeped in this content, not just as someone who enjoys some of the genre, but someone who's written about it, do you think that's the case? Do you think we've run this cycle of sort of superhero films and now the culture has moved to something else? Or do you think it's just an ebb and flow that we see in a lot of other areas?
No, I don't. I mean, the thing you have to understand is there's a difference between superhero films and like there always have been and there always will be superhero films. Mm-hmm. There have not always, and maybe there won't be, comic book films, which is different.
Right.
But Star Wars is largely a superhero film. I mean, what is the Force but a superpower? The Matrix. I mean, there's so many, superhero films out there that basically have the same, sort of trope. I think, just as somebody that followed Marvel, I think they plotted this great epic that was hugely, hugely successful. And I think the thing that nobody talks about that actually had a really, really big impact is, my Howard classmate, Chadwick Boseman, passing away.
Yeah.
Because they clearly were gonna, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like they were.
It was gonna be a centerpiece.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And that's no, disrespect to Tish or anything like that. I loved Wakanda forever. I think Ryan's an incredible, storyteller. But that was a big deal. Mm-hmm. That was a huge, huge deal. And so, one of the things I do respect about them is I always, they were the first people to realize, maybe with the exception of the early Superman movies, that if you take it seriously, that actually matters.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? It actually matters, you know what I mean? If you take it seriously, then the world will take it seriously. So no, I mean, I don't know. I'm not in the business. I know there's certain people that get, really upset, about the sheer number of them, although they're less now. I don't quite understand that. Mm-hmm. But no, I think as long as, there'll be quality, comic book films, those films will probably do well. That's what I think.
So I want to talk to you. We're going to move into sort of an issue that was extremely important to me. And as someone, who was a writer and screenwriter and the types of work that you've done. Over the last 2 years, last summer we had the writer strike, which is something that I covered a great deal of, was very passionate about it, had people on a work podcast that we talked about. One of the biggest issues that the writers were concerned about is artificial intelligence, right? Yeah. Which, again, I think is a misnomer because it's basically just a plagiarism machine right now. It's not really intelligence. It's just stealing. As someone who makes a lot of your living in producing content, right? What are your thoughts about how either the federal government, because we certainly can't necessarily trust the private sector, or maybe even some of the theorists about technology now should be looking at artificial intelligence? Because it seems its grip has been stealing from talented artists and reproducing it and having somebody else slap their name on it. What are sort of your thoughts about that as an artist and a creator?
Well, I should say that I'm involved in a lawsuit, so that's the first thing. I mean, I can still talk about it, but I'm suing those guys because they're using my books. So I just want to lay my cards on the table. In terms of what we were talking about, I think it's important to be very specific because I think you're asking me about large language models because people use the term AI for everything. Right. And yesterday it was one thing and now it's AI. It's become kind of hustle marketing language at this point. But in terms of large language models that, basically draw content from books, I think writing is really, really important. I think it's really, really important for even people who are not professional writers to learn how to write. I think there's a real direct relationship between writing and thinking.
Yeah.
I was listening to an author, he was actually on Ezra Klein's podcast the other day, and he was talking about how he wrote his book, and he used some of the large language models to do his book, and one of the things he used it to help with was one of the things that is the most difficult that any writer will tell you, and that is like segues. Segues are really hard. They're always very, very hard. So he would, put in the chat GPT or whatever, I got these two, paragraphs, I'm trying to link them, how do I segue? And the thing would spit out 5 options, and, I guess he would pick the best one, maybe massage it a little bit. Segues are very hard because they are forcing you to, as clearly as possible, establish the relationship between two things that are not necessarily obviously related. That's writing. That's a big part of writing. You know what I mean? So if you're like not doing I don't know what you're doing. I mean, there are other things to do, to be sure. You know what I mean? But and I enjoy that. You know what I mean? It'd be like there are people who do this, the Sunday Times crossword puzzle. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess you could feed that into a computer, but don't you like doing the crossword puzzle?
Right.
Don't you enjoy it? I think that's the first thing I would say. I would say this, the second thing I would say is in this country and in this culture of move fast and break things, and we would move fast and break things before old boy from Facebook said that. We like to introduce things, and then they tell you 5 or 10 years later, how it's actually screwing up the country.
That's fine. We can do that.
Sorry, guys. How it's actually screwing up the country. You know what I mean? And it's I wonder, when you're handing over large swaths of your brain to do these sorts of things, are we sure we're not losing anything?
Yeah.
Are we sure? And there are all sorts of other aspects of our society. We just introduce technology, introduce. You know what I mean? And by technology, I mean that in the broadest sense. Innovation, whatever. And we don't really take time, to ask questions. And so I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, there is a lot of fear of LLMs taking writers' jobs, and I just want to say for the record, I don't fear these things. And here is why: the people behind them have a misapprehension of what writing is. They think writing is, I love Toni Morrison, I love E.L. Doctorow, I love James Baldwin, I love Kendrick Lamar. I sit down and it's an amalgamation of all of that coming out of my head. When in fact, I do love all of those things. But also I went to Howard University, and I walked through the yard and I saw certain things. And I live in New York City. And on the flight out here, I saw something else this morning. And that's been working in my head ever since. Or 2 years ago, I went to Africa for the first time. And I've been trying to figure out what that means. Until the LLM can walk out into the world and have its own original experience, it cannot write. It cannot write. Now, there are people that want it to write, because there are people who are in the business of replacing human beings with all of their difficulties and all of their rough edges. You know what I mean? Who want to escape, who are fundamentally anti-human. But until, and maybe they will one day, until they can create a thing that can, actually go out in the world and have experiences, which is what real writing really, really ultimately depends on, the thing can't write. It can only, as you say, steal.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more from my conversation with Ta-Nehisi Coates, including his thoughts on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is A Word with Jason Johnson. Stay tuned. This is Jason Johnson, host of A Word, Slate's podcast about race and politics and everything else. I want to take a moment to welcome our new listeners. If you've discovered A Word and like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And let us know what you think by writing us at aword@slate.com. Thank you. Beyonce, Serena Williams, Martin Luther King Jr., Tracy Ellis Ross. We all know their names. We might even think we know their stories. But we can't fully understand their experiences and significance until we hear and tell their stories from a Black perspective. If you're interested in hearing more, NPR has a new collection of podcast episodes celebrating the Black experience. In NPR's Black Stories, Black Truths collection, you'll hear stories of joy and resilience, empowerment, and creating world-shifting things out of struggle. Every episode is a living account about what it means to be Black today from a unique Black perspective. Some stories might make you laugh, some might inspire you, while others might make you feel uncomfortable. Sometimes you might even feel all these emotions in the same 5-minute span. From Megan Thee Stallion to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Michelle Obama to the women behind the Montgomery bus boycott, there's no limit to the range of NPR noir. Black perspectives haven't always been centered in the telling of America's story. Now they are the story. Listen now to Black Stories, Black Truths from NPR, wherever you get podcasts.
Hi, this is Dahlia Lithwick, host of Slate's legal podcast, Amicus. If you're listening to this show, you might be interested in Amicus's live show that we're hosting in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, May the 14th. My colleague, Mark Joseph Stern, and I will be talking to some amazing guests, including Sherilyn Ifill and a sitting state Supreme Court justice, all about how originalism, a relatively recently invented way of interpreting the Constitution, has taken over the Supreme Court and radically reshaped the law. It's been doctrinal rocket fuel for the conservative legal movement and facilitated the rolling back of abortion rights, the expansion of gun rights, and the obliteration of the separation of church and state. And as another wildly consequential Supreme Court term careers to its end, the court's originalists are on a tear. But there's something you can do about it, and we hope you'll join us in D.C. on May 14th to explore the possible pathways out of the current situation. Go to slate.com/Amicus Live for tickets.
You're listening to A Word with Jason Johnson. Today, we're sharing a special conversation with award-winning author Ta-Nehisi Coates. We talked recently at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival, and I asked him about the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians.
You spent time in the occupied territories last year, and you were there before October 7th. One, I have to ask, what drew you there? Was there any particular reason, or was it just something that you had always wanted to do? You wanted to have that experience? And what are some of the things that really stuck with you from the time that you spent there?
I'm looking at the time. Wow. Sometimes, like whatever. A couple things. The first thing was I wrote a story actually 10 years ago, Case for Reparations, that mentioned Israeli reparations as a possible model, and I caught a lot of criticism for that, and I came to feel, frankly, relatively quickly that the criticism was warranted. And I didn't have the details of it. I didn't quite understand why. I couldn't have written something to really, explain why. But there's a thing you have, there's a level of being a human being, which is, you're sitting, I don't know, at the coffee table in the morning with your wife, and you say, X, Y, and Z, and you speculate on things that maybe don't quite feel right, but you don't have the knowledge to take them to the level of writing about them or talking about them publicly yet. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty much my relationship to Israel, to the West Bank, Gaza, occupied territories, East Jerusalem, et cetera. It just felt off. And I had this feeling when I would read, and I would read quite a bit, that I just wasn't quite hearing everything. I didn't know what it was. Mm-hmm. But I just felt like I wasn't getting the full, story. Because what I was getting is this group of people just want to kill Jews, and that's it. Mm-hmm. That's really the problem. They're blowing themselves up. They're violent. I don't know why they're doing it. Why do they hate us? And there was very little what I felt past the smell test. Now, I couldn't have told you what was wrong, mm-hmm. but it felt wrong. So I went over for 10 days. I was in Tel Aviv. I was in East Jerusalem. I was in West Jerusalem, which are two different experiences. Anybody that's been over there knows that. I was in Ramallah. I was outside of Ramallah. I was in the South Hebron Hills. I was in Hebron itself. I was in Haifa. I was in Lyd. I went everywhere they would have me. And it was life-changing. And more of us should go. Because they are leaving things out. and they are lying. And I don't mean that in a conspiratorial, like everybody get into a room. I got there and second or third day, we're leaving East Jerusalem or out of Jerusalem, and we're going into the occupied territories. And the first thing I noticed is that if you have one colored license plate, you use one road. And if you have another color, you use the other road. And the one color license plate over here corresponds to Israeli citizens, most of whom are Jewish, of the state. And the other corresponds to those who are occupied, who are all Palestinians. So you're a black dude and you see that. It's hard to see that and be like, You know what I mean? You see signs when you're going into the occupied territory, that basically say, Israeli citizens cannot come here. You talk to people, and they talk about how the cisterns on their roofs, which are there to collect water, are illegal. And then you read the reports, which I did, and you understand that it is Israeli policy that on the West Bank, they control the aquifers in the land, and they control the rain overhead. And for the first time I thought about this, I said, well, these people have actually advanced past Jim Crow by segregating water itself. Not the toilets, not the water itself. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then I, started, dumb stuff I didn't know. Since the occupation of 1967, these people have been living without, the vote or any ability to determine their political future at all. And that was familiar to me. That was very, very, very familiar to me. I've said this before, but, when I got to the city of Hebron and, I'm walking down the street and the guard says, this dude can't go down the street, but you can. Wow. And then I come to another street and the guard stops me and he asks me what my religion is. And it was very clear what the answer, that he wanted from me. Right. I went just outside of the city of Hebron to a small Israeli settlement. And in the mid-90s, there was a massacre in what they call the Cave of the Patriarchs, where, and I don't want to get this wrong, but, it said that, some of the great biblical prophets are buried there. I believe it's Jacob, Isaac, and Rebecca. I wasn't raised Christian, forgive me. But I believe that that's right, okay? So this radical, right-wing dude comes in there and he massacres 30, Muslims while they're praying, okay? I get into this settlement. Do you know they have a tombstone to this dude raised above ground? And there's stones on the tombstone where people come every day. I said, man. And so I think one of the things that people are missing in this moment is just, in Gaza, we are over 30,000 dead. We are seeing access to food used as a weapon. We are seeing hospitals bombed. But this is being done to secure an apartheid state. And that was so clear to me. And I just want to be absolutely clear with everybody in this room or whoever sees this. That does not give you the right to massacre people. I don't believe that. I don't believe it. I just, I don't believe that because you are under, suffering great pain or under grievous injury, that gives you the right to part with your own humanity. But I do think that those of us who want to comment on this, or those of us who are annoyed by some kids up at Columbia, or those of us who are annoyed by some kids at UVA or some kids at Brown, we owe it to ourselves as American citizens who are bankrolling this to be absolutely clear on what we are bankrolling and exactly what they are annoyed by. Because I'm seeing a lot of.
I want to follow up on this because I think that's a big part of this conversation when you say annoyed by, right? You have students on many campuses throughout the country who are protesting. And that's not new. That's what oftentimes college students do. It's what that's sort of the mythology of college, right? You go there and you engage in this activism. Is it really that we're hearing annoyance from sort of mainstream elites and politicians, or is it really just a desire to silence any criticism of policy? Because I don't know that most of the pushback that I'm seeing, even the violent pushback that I'm seeing, is from people who really care about the issue. I think it seems to be more from the standpoint of just, we want you to shut up and go along.
I think they care.
Okay.
I think they care. Because if the college kids are right, then the consequences are quite dire. Mm-hmm. Like they say something really, really dark. And I for one, obviously think they're right. The thing you have to understand is that when the Holocaust happened, America tells this story of, having saved the world and world. That's not what happened. No. What happened. We got in after Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And we watched, Hitler pass the laws, which he studied American laws, by the way, to fashion, to get to. We watched Hitler rampage, kill, etc. We were pulled into that fight. So much so that in 1948, the same year that Israel declares its independence, Harry Truman is disgusted because when we pass our laws in terms of immigrants, we're still holding quotas for Jews. So America historically has had a very, as long as they're not over here policy. Mm. This is the reason why you see so many, folks who clearly, have anti-Semitism, who can talk, out of one side of their mouth about great replacement, and then the other side can be Zionists, as long as they're not over here. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so that's a strong incentive. And what this is forcing us to do is to confront some things. In our own, and I will take this at its most positive. I'll give folks who might would disagree with me as much credit as I possibly can. For those of us who truly remain disturbed, because the Holocaust is still with us. It's within living memory. For those of us who are still legitimately pained by that, for those of us who are still legitimately pained by any reading of European history, and you see a group of people who have been oppressed and persecuted for over 2,000 years, for those of us who really feel that those people deserve to live in safety, deserve to live in peace, as we would want to live in safety, in peace, if the college kids are right, we have to then say our chosen method for securing that safety and that peace has been to oppress another group of people. And I'm just not with that, man. I sat with folks, and the one request they made of me, I sat in caves with people. I sat in, people who are living in caves, and at any moment, the state could come in and destroy the actual cave home. I just saw insanity. And I was most enraged, and I remain most enraged, and maybe you're picking this up, when people who call themselves journalists, who sit on their backsides and comment about essentially the manners of politics, civility, but, really have nothing to say of depth about the actual policy. And the reason why they have nothing to say, because if you go over and see it, it's clear. It's clear. This is not complicated. The right and wrong morality of it, I'm telling you, is not complicated. If you were for that, then you would have been for Jim Crow. You would have been for apartheid. It's so clear. It's so clear.
When I hear that, the other thing that strikes me, you say we've had a lot revealed. I think that what the coverage of that conflict has revealed a lot of things about how journalism works in America. I also think that the campus protests have revealed a lot about universities. that we haven't been willing to discuss. The role and influence of large donors to universities and what they do. Now, I'm not saying that there was some halcyon day in the past where people who gave money didn't expect influence, but there might have been a time 30 or 40 years ago where if I give 2 or 3 million, I want my name on a building, right? And I just want to be feted by a bunch of nice kids when I come to campus. Now, it seems like it's been very clear that large donors are expecting to have influence not just on having their name on a building, but also possibly policy, curriculum, and everything else like that. Talk a little bit about that, what we've seen and how that's been exposed during these protests.
Well, the reason that was true is because this is probably, maybe not the most, but it's certainly one of the most democratic moments in America's long history, which does not have a long history of democracy, in fact. That's just true. And so it used to be that there was a narrow band of concerns. I mean, that's the reason. I mean, honestly, people should be really, those of us who actually care about, the cause of peace and freedom and, want to see, people live in peace and freedom should be very heartened by this moment, because the Palestinian cause has never had this much gravity and had this many people, willing to put skin in the game here in America. And so I just think for a long time that the bandwidth of those who actually had a voice in this was so small that the debate only happened between, these sort of narrow lines. It's the reason why people are so disturbed by this quote unquote era of woke, or in France, as they say, I can't believe it, they weren't even creative with this. France, they call it le wokeisme. Now, I'm not caricaturing, that's what it's called.
Okay. It's like Le Big Mac.
It's literally called, you can like Google le wokeisme, it's an actual thing. But what's happening around the world is that societies in which people who were in leadership positions basically felt they had the freedom to exploit, to take, to strip mine, have now found themselves answerable to some of those communities. And that really is the problem. I mean, that really is the issue. And so, folks are trying to do whatever they can, to shrink the dialogue, to shrink the debate. And it's irresponsible. I would hope that if my child, were on a college campus right now, or anywhere, and the country that he, pledged his allegiance to was bankrolling the bombing of hospitals, I would hope that would disturb him. I would really, really hope like he would be upset about that. And so this idea that, you should like lower your voice and wait for, and I'm not a protester. I don't like protests. Like that's not my chosen mode of activism. But the idea that what you really need to do is just kind of lower your voice and, speak in these dulcet tones. While little children are having to have surgery performed without anesthesia. It's absurd. It's absurd and it's shameful. I don't know what we're doing as journalists.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more from my discussion with Ta-Nehisi Coates from the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. This is A Word with Jason Johnson. Stay tuned.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
You're listening to A Word with Jason Johnson. Today, we're bringing you a special conversation I had with award-winning writer Ta-Nehisi Coates at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. We're picking up our conversation about the Middle East conflict and my questions about how it's being framed by the press and some national leaders.
There doesn't seem to be a lot of even just rhetorical leadership from the two major parties in this country. Where do you think both Republicans and Democrats or Joe Biden himself have failed in their sort of public discourse about what's happening, in particular about the protests, let alone the policies themselves?
Well, on one side, on the right, you have people who just have fallen prey to an ideology of violent power. So they are exactly where you would expect them to be.
Right.
In terms of Biden, again, I'm going to try to give the most compassionate reading I can that's possible. There was an era in this country. Well, let me back up. There's a story that can be told. And I think, to be honest with you, this is what happened with the case for reparations. There's a story that can be told of a people who, as I said, after millennia of oppression, repression, pogroms, genocidal violence, industrial genocide, finally make their way back to their ancestral home that they claim and found a state, and finally can have a place for themselves. That's a nice story. And I think Biden is of a generation when that story was very powerful. But the fact is that story always depended on a lack of access of Palestinians to what Edward Said called the right to narrate, which is a fancy way of saying, they weren't on the panels. You know what I mean? And I see that even to this day. It's nothing for me to, cut on. I won't call out anybody's network, but it's nothing for me to cut on any network, and see people talking about this and not see a single Palestinian talking.
Right.
It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And I think when I am 80 years old, should I be lucky enough to be 80 years old? Yeah, I hope to be spending time with my grandkids. I hope to be traveling. I guess I'll still be writing. But this is kind of like where we started this conversation. At a certain point, the world has moved.
Right.
And you're not part of that. And so I think particularly, around Israel, it's that you have a president that in his mind, there's a story that belongs to a world that's gone or is going, because it's not sustainable, because it's not a true story. You know what I mean? And increasingly, there are people who have access to this. I have to tell you, and then I'll let this go. One of the things that really troubled me about being over there is you have a state that was formed out of a need. And the need, as I've said before, was to be safe from genocidal, ethnic, and frankly, in the case of Hitler, straight up racist violence. And what I saw was a state that had gotten that message, and its response was, we just need our own means of violence. Not that we need to make the world safe from this sort of thing, but our problem was that we didn't have the guns. And see, the cold part about that was that forced me to think about myself. Because you hear echoes of that in the Black community. There are people, there's an old saw that, Black people didn't have a problem with slavery. They had a problem that they was the slaves. I think that is a thing that can be said of any oppressed group, though. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of, we are of this mind that because you are oppressed, you will necessarily be ennobled. You will necessarily be wiser. No, you won't. No, you won't. In fact, America is filled with people who were formerly oppressed, who came over here and did horrible things. And I have to say that, when I thought about myself as a Black person and my belief in the humanity of Black people, and that being my foundation, not that we're any better, but that we're human, which means we're just as mediocre, you know what I mean? Just as awful, you know what I mean? Just as great, just bad, all of those things. I could see how I'd be susceptible to the same damn thing. But then I thought about it, I said, good Lord, if I came out of slavery, if I came out of segregation, Jim Crow, and I found myself part of a group of people or a state that was doing that, what am I anymore? Am I even Black anymore? Do I even want to be part of that anymore?
You know, it's interesting. I was talking about this earlier this week, and I know I'm going to get the name wrong, but the young woman, you remember University of Michigan, the Klan used to march through in the 90s, right? They would go through every year to this march. And there's the famous photo of the young black woman throwing herself on a Klan member, you know, who people were going to beat. And I think her name is Keisha Thomas. She was in high school at the time. Right. And her quote is, you know, you can't beat the good into people. And I was reading about, you know, her life ever since, and she was like, yeah, you know, a lot of people criticized me in that moment. They were like, look what you're doing, you know, you're protecting this person. But she was sort of saying what you were talking about, which is like, you know, yes, I'm angry. Yes, I'm disgusted that the Klan is here, but I can't be a part of the same kind of violence or any variation of violence, right? When I think about that, we have a lot of protesters, a lot of African Americans in this country. A lot of people don't realize 20% of American Muslims are African American, right? You know, it's something that's overlooked a lot.
The oldest Muslim communities in this country are black.
Right.
I mean, there've been black Muslims here since slavery, literally.
What impact do you think what's happening in Gaza and Israel right now is having on black voters? I mean, I think there's some numbers that suggest things, but from your reading, your experience, being at the Mecca, what impact do you think it's having?
It's not good.
Right.
It's not good. I think we have gotten in the habit of saying phrases like Black-Jewish relationship, Black-Jewish alliance, and not really interrogating what that has been historically. And it has been more complicated than I think a lot of us, you know, are really willing to discuss. It's not just Schwerner and Cheney. I mean, it is that, and it's important, but it's not just that. And so you're dealing with a group of people who, on a fundamental, bone-deep level, you know it. Look, I walked over, I got it immediately. Like by day one, day two, I was like, oh, I know what this is. You know what I mean? And so you're dealing with people that on a fundamental level can recognize, and the thing I had to think about was how, when I was a kid and my maybe during like the war in Lebanon, my dad would be watching the news and he instinctively take the side of the Palestinians. You know, and so I grew up, I said, well, man, you didn't know anything. You ain't been over there. You ain't saying ... You know what I mean? Then I go over there and I'm saying, well, what it was he could perceive something, you know what I mean? There was a radar. You know what I mean?
I have an activist friend, and I won't use the word that she uses, but you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Yeah, she's like, black folks inherently know who the N-word is in this situation.
That's right, yeah.
And that's how we view international policy.
That is.
And I'm curious, though, how do you think that manifests? I mean, it's obvious disappointment, obvious disgust.
Well, I'll say the hard, difficult thing. I hope it doesn't keep people from voting. And I think maybe, in fact, due to some of the rhetoric of previous generations, we have come to think of voting as the end-all of politics and a holy right, and it's not that. So often, voting really is about picking the lesser evil. You know, as you know, Barbara Ransby, who told me one time, she said, people say, well, you vote and you're picking the lesser evil, and she says, yes, and I'm in favor of less evil. And I am too. And so, like, I stand by everything I just said, about the occupied territories, about Palestine, about Gaza. But sometimes you are in a moment as an adult, and we all have found ourselves in moments like this, even in our personal lives, where the choice is not between great and bad. The choice is not even between good and bad. It's between bad and significantly worse. Significantly worse. I'm one of these people who, the quote unquote extreme language that people use, about what's going on. I'm one of those people that thinks it has credibility. But I'm also one of those people who feels that it actually really can get worse. And part of your responsibility is to forestall the worst. That's not all of your responsibility. That's not the end of your politics. And this is why these protests actually are really important, because they're part of politics too. You know what I mean? But like we canonize and we, sanctify, the vote. The vote is important. Like taking out the trash is important. Like brushing your teeth is important. But that's the minimum. That's the base level. You know what I'm saying? And so, I hope we can take out the trash. I hope we're willing to do that. So I just not voting or voting for somebody who would make things significantly worse is not how you show your displeasure. There are other ways. Right. Look, you want to stand in front of Anthony Blinken's house and throw fake blood at his limousine? I'm all for you. I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. Like, I'm fine. Republicans do this all the time. They are rude as hell to the people they vote for.
It's true.
And I'm fine with it. You know what I mean? Like, there should be a high cost for people that, have so much power. But I don't think, I don't think staying home is really a solution. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank Ta-Nehisi Coates. This has been a fantastic conversation. It's a real honor. And I tell the audience, we have a number of close friends in common, so I always feel flattered when I get to talk to them when everybody else does. We are officially out of time. Ta-Nehisi, thank you so much for joining me this evening for the Cascade Festival and for Word. Thank you so much.
Thank you, bro. Thank you. Thank you, bro.
And that's a Word for this week. The show's email is aword@slate.com. This episode was produced by Kristie Taiwo-Makanjuola. Ben Richmond is Slate's Senior Director of Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is the Vice President of Slate Audio. Our theme music was produced by Don Will. I'm Jason Johnson. Tune in next week for a Word.
Pulling up to Mickey D's just for drinks? Oh yeah, that's me. Nothing extra, just perfection and a straw. Coming in hot for the coldest cups on the block. Because there are drinks. Then there are drinks from McDonald's.
Ever combine an ice-cold frozen Coke with piping hot fries? Try frozen drinks any size for $1.49. Prices and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.